And even just adding one personality can just really change the balance of things and how the class works as a community.
If you're an educator struggling with student behavior, staff stress, and systems that don't seem to work, this podcast is for you. We believe in learning with and from one another. We don't have to do this alone. Hey y'all, Doc Martha here. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I've been working with educators to create more trauma-informed schools for the last 14 years. Here we'll be talking with educators and leaders who are already doing this work, actively building trauma-informed schools. We'll talk about practical strategies, some that work and some that surprised us, and what it takes to move from theory to real sustainable practice. Because you know that this work isn't about quick fixes. It's about supporting educators, building useful systems, and sharing our learnings. Hi y'all, Doc Martha here. Today I'm joined by Caitlin Hernandez, who is my wife and also is a special education teacher.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your career path?
Sure. So this is my 10th year teaching special education. I've taught over the years everything from resource to special day class, primarily resource in kinder through 5th grades.
And when you say resource, what does that mean? Because I think not every district calls it the same thing.
Sure. So every student who has an IEP receives resource interventions of some type. Now, that might be speech or occupational therapy, physical therapy, things like that. But what I support with is purely the academics. So reading intervention, writing, math, social emotional learning, things like that. And I support, depending on how big the school is and how many students have IEPs, it might be all of the students with academic IEPs, or it might just be some of them if the school is bigger and has multiple resource specialists.
Yeah. So when we worked together initially, you were at a bigger school.
Yes, that was a site where I started out teaching 5th and 6th grade resource, and then eventually we changed the format and I had 3rd through 5th primarily.
And I was there as the Hearts consultant, healthy environments and response to trauma in schools. And our focus that year was really on anti-biased, anti-racist practices in education. So I think I delivered a training every month that was an anti-racist, anti-biased, something like that, at a staff meeting.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And I remember it was especially helpful, I think, to some folks who had been there for a long time and sort of watched the population of the school change. And I think that I certainly felt that it was beneficial because we not only had students who had been there from kinder onward, but a new crop of students. Some of them were being bussed in from other areas, and some of them were coming to us because we had such a robust special education system, but also we're doing so much work around trauma-informed teaching. And so I think it was very helpful just to hear ways that we could improve and do things differently.
Yeah, some of those kids were bussed in from quite a ways away, right? They were on the bus very early in the morning.
Yeah.
That was a tough setup. And so I did those trainings, and I also was available for consultation in classrooms. I did observations there. We had another clinician who was actually seeing students as their therapist. And she started at the beginning of the project, and I came midway through because they needed both parts of that, and both the training and also the therapy side. And so I came in, I only did the trainings and consultations.
Should I share how we first connected and why I reached out? It's kind of an interesting story.
Sure.
So there was a student, not naming names or anything, but I kept hearing hearsay about this student that they were too loud, they were disruptive, they were this, that, and the other thing. And they did receive IEP services, but not from me. And so I felt really concerned because when I saw that student, it seemed very clear to me that they were just bored because they were super smart and stuck in a general education class that I think was below, it was not challenging them. And that's no shade to the teacher or anything. It's just like, in the same way that if a student is struggling academically, if a student is gifted, as we sometimes say, or just advanced in some areas, we still have a duty to support them in being challenged and in being able to access their education in a way that is interesting to them so that they're not bored all day and probably maybe causing something that could be perceived as a disruption just because they have nothing better to do. But I didn't know what to do. I was not the student's teacher. I was not their case manager. And so I remembered also feeling like this was a racially charged situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, let me just ask Doc Martha, what can I do to be like an upstander as somebody who's not on this child's IEP team, but as someone who was being put in the situation of hearing this child be talked down to or dismissed or shut down when it was clear to me that they really were very creative and bright and wanting to learn and to do things and to be curious and to explore different things.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too, because I feel like often when educators are talking about differentiation, they are talking about making the work simpler for students or making it more accessible in a way that students who are not at grade level can access. And there's also a duty to differentiate in the other direction. So we had a meeting.
Yes. And I remembered my main takeaway from that meeting was just you saying, say something, like interrupt what's going on in that moment. So if that student is upset and another adult is, I don't even know that I need to say being unkind, but just doing something that's not helpful to the situation, something that's maybe escalating the situation or not conducive to improving the situation, to just say something and like sort of impose myself, as it were, into that conversation and offer to support or have the child join my group and help the younger kids or join the older kids, like whatever was going on. That was my main takeaway, which I did take to heart and was able to incorporate that student into some of the things that I was doing. I was able to talk to the student's case manager who was supporting her with her IEP and say, hey, like I'd love to have this student in my groups if possible, when possible. So just to do little things like that and to try to interrupt when things were not going in a way that I felt was
helpful.
Right.
I think that one of the things that gets in the way for people when we start talking about anti-bias, anti-racism is that folks imagine that you have to just knock people down with it. Like, hey, cut that out. Don't be an ass. Don't be a jerk. And that's not always necessary.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if it's ever necessary, really, but that doesn't have to be the way that it is.
Yeah.
Really, we're talking about supporting people because I don't think educators or most people in general are out to harm other people.
No. I hope, and most days I think that teachers are generally in it because they care about children and they care about education and they are interested in figuring out how kids tick and learn. And I noticed that I myself sometimes forget about that. I'm like, oh my gosh, why is this educator making these choices? But like we all make choices every day. And some of them, at least I for myself, look back and I'm like, why did I do that? And I'm sure everybody does that.
Yeah. I think that, I myself do those kinds of things where later I'm like, wow, what was going on? That is not what I wanted to say, or that is not the way that I want to be in the world. And like, if stress is high, we're more likely to react from like old learnings rather than like trying to be who we want to be based on things that we've learned as adults. So one of the reasons that I invited you today is because as my wife and having lived together during the shelter in place, you have heard the trainings, the sort of basic trauma-informed trainings and all kinds of varieties many, many times. What's that like for you to have heard that so many times?
You know, it's funny because there are parts of your trainings that I know by heart. And as you say it, I know what's coming next. I know how it goes. But I feel like, and it sounds very cliche, but it's genuinely true. I always have a different takeaway and or you say something different and add something. And each time that I've been in a training, and often sometimes during the COVID era when I was like in the other room between Zooms myself, and I would hear you presenting, I'd be like, oh, that's something that I haven't tried or haven't done or don't always keep at top of mind. And I would like jot it down. And I am one of those people who writes, I love to make lists, and I make lists of aspirations about everything. And so I remember my first year of teaching, I came away with like a 200 item list of things that I wanted to do better or differently the next year. I don't know how many of them I actually did, but I did look over it and made some like action items. And so I think I feel the same way about the trainings, is that there are some of the tenets that, of course, I know very well and by heart and keep top of mind. And there are things that I learn differently each time, or sort of am able to examine through a different lens of like, this is my current class. These are our current struggles or areas of growth or areas of need. And how can I apply these trauma-informed practices and make the learning environment better?
Yeah. I remember when you started doing the special day class, and I was like, yes, I have lots of ideas, as we say in our house. I always have a good idea. I'm full of good ideas. But I was like, oh, because now you have a regular classroom. I have all these ideas of how you could do all these things, which is, let me just say for y'all listening, that's not really all that helpful for me to be full of good ideas that I think might work in a classroom. But I remember feeling like, oh, this is a whole new scenario. And so it'll be different the way that you carry the information that we have talked about many times, or that you've heard me say many times.
Yeah, that was definitely a different application, because most years I have been a resource specialist, which means I have small groups. So I can only do some of the things that Doc Martha teaches about. And I also was very excited. I was like, oh, it's like a big blank canvas, and I can finally try out all these things and see how I do with the class, which, as you all out there are probably imagining, it turned out quite different from what I imagined and hoped it would be, because you cannot just imagine these things into being.
Yeah. And every situation is a little bit different.
Right.
And
you can't predict what the needs are going to be and the way that students are going to interact with one another. And then it's just when I had it sort of balanced, another kid would come, or a kid would leave.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah.
That was tough.
Yeah.
You would be like, okay, we got the morning circle down. And then sometimes without any notice, there'd be a new child in the classroom.
There was never any notice. And I'm sure that's a thing that many teachers can relate to, because, families move and kids are moved around and transferred and class changes. Like it can be so unpredictable. And even just adding one personality, even if it's not like necessarily a big outgoing personality, can just really change the balance of things and how the class works as a community.
Right. I remember I was working with a teacher who had the new student who joined was actually, like you said, not a big personality. It was like a very quiet student, and I think generally attentive in class. And when I went in for the consult, her main concern was that now suddenly all of the kids wanted to be her best friend. This child was new.
Aww.
And so everybody, I don't know, they liked her.
Yeah.
And they wanted her. So then they were like vying for this new student's attention.
Aww.
And they were like jostling to sit next to the new student.
Yes.
And like it was like a whole thing. And even though the student herself didn't bring in any big energy that was negative, but that suddenly
it's probably very overwhelming.
All the children wanted to be her friend.
Oh, I mean, I'm glad they were friendly and welcoming, but that could be a lot.
Yes. So over your 10 years, I'm wondering if there have been any particular trauma-informed tenets, principles, ideas that you have found helpful, or things that weren't helpful, things that you're like, no, that actually doesn't seem like a thing that's going to work, or anyway, your thoughts on those things.
Two things come to mind that have been especially helpful across the 10 years, across the different special education things and formats that I have done. And I think the first one, which is something that you often say, is that trauma-informed teaching and anti-racist framing benefits everybody. So what I'm thinking about is relationship building and really getting to know students and trying to form communities and having things be student-led as much as possible and giving voice and choice and things like that sometimes I do think of as trauma-informed, in that we're trying to know the students as individuals and work to their strengths, play to their strengths, and acknowledge their areas of growth. that benefits everybody. It makes me think of, universal design and curb cuts and how they benefit so many folks. It's not just folks in wheelchairs. It's folks who have a suitcase or a stroller or just struggle with curbs. Like things like that in the classroom can really benefit the whole community. It's not just a certain subset of students who may or may not have trauma.
Right.
I just try to keep that in mind. And the other thing is that co-regulation to me is so vital and also can be so challenging. I remember learning from one of your early trainings, you encouraged us to really have a colleague that was a co-regulator that we could check in with and sort of share glows and grows and things like that from each day. And you also impressed upon us that the more regulated we are able to be, the more regulated our students will be able to be because we are sort of setting the temperature of the classroom. And that's something that I really try to keep in mind, especially with students who are having a harder time staying regulated and managing big feelings. I'm thinking a lot of the younger students, but even older students who just have big feelings and are trying to learn how to express what they need and how they feel and why they feel that way. Like it's a lot. And then you're expecting them to learn on top of it. So I think that I do my best every day to be calm, which sounds maybe obvious, but again, it's not always that easy. And I think that calmness really does help them not only to be calm themselves, but to know that they can expect more mellow environment when they come to small group and that they kind of know where the edges are, right? That like, if I do have to use a more stern voice, they know that it's time to like buckle down,
right?
Because I don't pull that out unless I really, really have to.
What do you say to folks who might critique that and say, well, you're just being too nice, you're being too soft?
People often say that to me. I just, again, it sounds a little cliche, but I don't think there's anything wrong with being too nice. And you can ask my kids, they probably will tell you that I am not nice all the time. Because, we still have boundaries and consequences, right? So if we don't get our work done, then maybe we lose a couple minutes off choice time. If we, are not using kind words, then we're going to have to take a little chill time and until we can be nice and kind to our classmates. Like, I think that people mistake being nice with like being calm and not being
punitive.
Yes.
Or harsh.
Yes. Right. With not being harsh. I definitely try always to be kind, but I don't believe that that's the same as letting them rule the roost or do whatever they want to do. I do also try to be, egalitarian as much as possible and to have students make choices when it's safe and reasonable for them to do so. And I definitely believe that they know and benefit from knowing that I am in charge and I'm not going to let other kids be unkind or let them do something that's not constructive for their learning and others' learning.
Right. So I have never done an observation and consultation in your classroom for what may be to some people obvious reasons. Mostly though, because I have never actually worked in a school that you were teaching in where that was part of what I was doing. And I have definitely done consultations with teachers that other teachers called too nice or too soft-spoken. I remember that I worked with a teacher who really esteemed another colleague who had a very firm voice. And she said to me, well, I'm never going to be like her. And I was like, I don't know that it's necessary for you to be like her. Like, you can be yourself and still have your classroom be conducive for your learners and regulated and calm. Like, I don't think that we have to use a harsh voice to calm a classroom.
In fact, I would argue that it doesn't. I mean, it might be quieter, but that might be because they're afraid of you. And I know you and I have talked about this. Sometimes there are classrooms that are very noisy and they're getting a lot of work done. It's really okay. But I think that, some, other teachers or admin or whoever, people who come in are probably like, oh my gosh, that class is out of control. But it's like, check on the work that's being done. Because I've definitely come into some classrooms and I'm like, oh, it's noisy in here. But then I find out what they're doing and I'm like, dang, they're doing some good like teamwork, community work. It's, I think there's this mistaken belief that a quiet classroom is a successful classroom and a noisy classroom is just out of control. And I don't think that's true.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think about when I have been in private school settings and or Montessori school settings. I can't think of the other one. I was in another one many, many years ago it wasn't Montessori, but it was one of those where they did a lot of project-based learning.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so loud. And actually, visually, it was chaotic. I was like, what is happening right now? And like you said, they were all working on stuff. They were all getting things done. And they didn't seem to be bothering each other.
No.
The teacher was okay with a little more noise. And I remember that I was there for the transition to English or whatever, the reading, writing part of the day. Mm-hmm. And she said, okay, we're changing to and then she put on, I remember she had an iPod, like an old school iPod.
So old school.
But it was in a little dock. It was very cute.
Yeah.
But she put on some music and all the students got pretty quiet. They weren't silent. Like you said, I don't think a silent classroom necessarily means everything is going well. But the noise level dropped and she didn't have to say inside voices or noise level 0 or whatever it is that teachers sometimes say, right? She just said, okay, we're moving to the next section. And she put on the music and they all were like, oh yeah, this is the quieter time and we're going to do different kind of work now.
I love that. And that's such a good example, again, of like a really trauma-informed way to transition. Doesn't need to have a lot of shouting or fanfare. It's just norms that you build on and strengthen by practicing it.
Mm-hmm. When I was talking with Jennifer Sinclair on an earlier podcast, she was talking about how much time and effort it takes to build in the norms.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about what that's like in your setting with your small groups?
Yes, it is definitely always an area of growth for me to work on norms because, again, I have so many groups. Sometimes the groups are not even consistent. And what by that I mean, I have reading intervention groups that typically stay consistent, but sometimes a student will move up or need to stay back and continue to work on a skill while the rest of the classes or the rest of the group is moving forward. So the groups, by which I mean who is in which group together, are often really in flux. Mm-hmm. So what I have tried to do in the more recent years is to kind of more broadly work on norms with all of the students that I have so that it doesn't matter which group you're in, when you come in, what subject you're coming in for, what grade you're in, but to have everybody participate in the beginning of the year in telling me what they think makes a safe, productive, responsible, enjoyable classroom. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we've made a poster. Sometimes we've just written them down. Sometimes different kids have done different pictures and we've done like a collage. This year, now that I think about it, we did not make any visual at all, but we talked about it. And I definitely remember continuing to collect sort of data from the different groups over the first, probably it was like the first month, honestly. And then I kept reviewing it just sporadically every couple of days and we would talk about it. And at first I would just read it and then students would start shouting out what they remembered or what they had contributed. Nice. So that everybody just kind of has a sense of what are we doing in here? Why are we here? What are we going to do to be, as we say, in our school district, safe, respectful, responsible, but what that looks like in small group. So, because we're in small group, I focus a lot on helping others and listening to what others are saying and things like that to contribute to the smaller format of the learning environment that we're doing. And it seems to work. I've definitely struggled over the years with, again, the groups changing and students having to sort of adjust and readjust and constantly recalibrate to the different things that they're doing and the different students that they're working with. But in terms of norms and sort of what is expected in terms of, I don't even want to say behavior, but just the way that we are in my groups, like their groups. Yeah, right. Like they generally are able to sort of meet those expectations and understand them and to feel some ownership in them because they had a part in shaping them.
Yeah. And then you also do a kind of a PBIS, positive behavior intervention and supports.
Right.
Wow, suddenly I can't remember what that stood for.
Yes, we have PBIS at our school. So we do it on the school-wide level where they can earn certain amounts of money, fake money, it's not real money. And then they can go get prizes. And then I do a system in my class where they earn tickets. So those are physical tickets. And they earn that not for getting right answers or improving.
Do you make those tickets?
No. I just ask students to put their name on them. They're just raffle tickets.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm not good at making things. So but they each have a little pouch with their name on it, and they put their tickets in there, and they earn those tickets from following our norms, essentially. So being kind, being respectful, being patient, attending to their work to the best of their abilities. Now, of course, this looks different for every student, right?
Sure.
And I was thinking about that also as we were talking earlier about what classrooms look, sound, feel like when they're being successful. And I think also the way that I address each small group is slightly different, right? Because it has different students in it with different needs. And so I have this luxury in small group of being able to adjust sort of the thermostat of the room, right? So some groups respond better to a really high energy. They really like to be sort of noisier and chattier, and they get the work done. And then other groups, sometimes if things get a little bit too high energy, then they can tip over the edge, right? So I have to try to keep it a little bit more even keel. And that way they can be themselves, but I am still sort of this grounding person who's like, okay, and bringing us back to what we're doing, right? So it looks different for each group, but I always ensure that they earn at least some tickets. Sometimes I tell them, oh, we didn't get as many tickets as we got yesterday. And sometimes I'll, tell them why if we're running out of time. But more often I try to be like, can anybody suggest something that we can do tomorrow so that we can do a better job, get more work done, earn more tickets. So it's not like you didn't get your tickets, you did such a bad job, but just like, here's the tickets we did get because we did these things well, and what can we work on tomorrow to do better and to earn some more tickets. And then eventually they can cash in those tickets for prizes. Those are usually prizes that they pick. So unlike, a school store or whatever, when there's sort of just a cache of generic prizes, I try to carve out a few minutes, and often I'll tell them, start thinking about this because it's time for you to earn a new prize. So think about some things that you might like. And then we sort of put our heads together and find something that does not break my bank, but that they can earn tickets for. And then we have a whole system where we determine together how many tickets they need to earn in order to get their prize, depending on how often they come and how expensive the prize is in the real world and how much work they need to do and a whole bunch of factors. I try to make it as simple as possible. But also
for them.
Yes. Not for me.
It's a big rubric for you.
Yes, right. But, so that it's fair. Because if a student only comes to me 3 times a week, it's not fair for them to have to wait 5 months to earn something. Right. So it looks, again, different for everybody. But it really seems to work well. I'm happy with it. And I think, again, they feel a lot of ownership. There's a lot of excitement and motivation. Not just to get the prize either, but just to earn their tickets. And they like to count. It's a good math bonus. They're like, let me count them. And I'm like, oh, let's practice our skip counting while we do that. Right. I'm such a teacher that way. It's terrible. But yeah.
Or great.
Or great. Yes, that's right. Sometimes they do groan about it, but I'm like, okay, well, you don't have to skip count. It's your choice. It's choice time.
So earlier you mentioned how in your first year of teaching, you made a list of 200 things that you wanted to get better at. Which is, that's a lot of things.
I should go find that list, see if I did any of them.
Right. And I'm curious about, I feel like there are some people in the world who are kind of like, this is the way I do a thing. I've always done it this way. I'm always going to do it this way. And there are other people who are like trying to grow and learn and keep evolving. Right. And so I'm curious about what are the things you've done over the 10 years to do that for yourself? Like, what are the ways that you've grown and developed?
So I think that our district used to do a much better job with this than they do now, but maybe also I'm just not plugged into the right space. So I remember, I had my credential coaching, which was fantastic. And I had a coach who had taught both special education and was a big math person, which was fantastic because I struggle so much with math my own self, but also teaching it. I learned so much just from having her like once every 2 weeks and just being able to like plan lessons with her or tell her what we were struggling with. It was so great. I wish every teacher could have that every year, just somebody to bounce things off of. There was also learning community of special educators teaching math around that same time, which was great. I used to go after school I think just once every month or something, which was also very helpful. And then sometimes there would be offerings from the special education sort of central office. So like maybe something about behavior support or writing a better IEP or things like that. But either because I've now been here for 10 years and they're starting to repeat, and or I am not seeing as many offerings, I sort of feel like now I'm on my own. And I have kind of found growth opportunities in a very unlikely place, which is Facebook, which I do not love Facebook. Let me just lead with that. And there are many Facebook groups, and there are many Facebook groups that offer sort of windows, if you will, not just into other special education classrooms, but also adults with various disabilities talking about their own education. They're also pages, right? So they're not just groups for discussion, but pages where folks are sharing as adults their experience with education and being in school as an autistic person or a neurodivergent person or somebody with a learning disability. And I find those so helpful, especially perhaps the groups where, for example, a parent is writing in and saying, my child is struggling with X, Y, and Z. And then if I click on it, I can read the comments where people who are actually autistic or actually have the similar disability profile can say, this was helpful to me in my childhood. You might try this, or ask the child about this. These are some questions that might give you some enlightening information. And I just have found those incredibly helpful. I think for me, it's also helpful because it's a little bit bite-sized, right? So like I get to scroll my feed and read about my friends, family, whatever, but then interspersed with that are these posts that I have the choice of, is this relevant to me and to my teaching, or is it not? And I can just scroll on by, or I can be like, oh my gosh, let me do a deep dive into this because this sounds like one of my students or something that I could imagine coming up this year or in a next year, and just to sort of file it in the back of my mind for later. So maybe not the most typical way of continuing to grow, but it's been really interesting and really helpful. And I really appreciate that it's kind of a fountain of knowledge that is not often tapped.
Is it all good knowledge?
Probably not. And I think that's why I like that I get to read through all the comments, right? There's often like 20 or 30 comments, and I am able to sort of take what I will, right? Because some of it, I'm like, ooh, that doesn't seem helpful. Let me just pass over that. And, I realize that as somebody who doesn't share the disabilities that most of my students have, like, I don't always know what something might strike me at first as like, oh, that's strange. But then if I think about it, sometimes I'm like, it's worth asking. It's worth trying. What do I know?
Right.
I'm just a teacher.
I think it's really interesting. Two parts of that. One, I think it's interesting, like what the district does or doesn't provide. When I started working here, there were a lot of PLCs that were very focused, that were very like specific.
Yes.
So we actually had a trauma-informed schools PLC. We had one for the school social workers. We had a separate one that was for teachers. I think we eventually blended those. But there was also like higher grade math things. Like they seemed very specific, which I think gave people the opportunity to choose what they were working on, to choose what they were thinking about. And I provide trainings in other districts that are still really very specific. Like in a couple of weeks, I'm going to do one up north that's about disproportionality. And I've done microaggression things, and I've done trainings on like how to make your reading lessons more trauma informed, like very specific. But those are offered by different districts. And so that part of that is about like, what does your district offer, I suppose. And then the other thing that's interesting to me about the Facebook group, so I know about your Facebook groups. She has a lot of Facebook groups that she's in. But I think like as a quote unquote professional who's doing trainings on these things, it's very interesting to know about how people are learning that aren't coming to these trainings, because we're not, in fact, in this moment, the trauma-informed work that I do is only in one school in your district. And it's only in a couple of other districts at all in this moment. And so then I think about like, where are people getting the information that they need and how
Yeah.
are they getting it? And how can we make sure that more educators get this information that I think is really important about trauma-informed work?
I also feel like for special education, general education teachers often are, in like little cohorts or they partner with other schools. And often special educators get left out, right? Because sometimes it's just about time. Like we have, IEPs and other meetings that we have to attend and things that need to get done. And so there just isn't time. But I often wish that I just had a couple of other resource specialists to talk to or bounce things off of. And I know folks are, really busy and maybe not all resource specialists want that. It would maybe just seem like another chore that they have to do.
Another meeting.
Yeah, or another email, right, to be sent. But it's been 10 years and I still have not really found that. Like somebody who would be like, can we just drop each other a line when something happens and ask questions or share a thing that we found? I often kind of wish that there were more of a cohort feel in special education because there are offerings, but often I can't go, right? Because I have something for that's school-wide or an IEP. Like
Right.
it would need to be a more free-form approach. And I think about that too for the work that you do. Like when would you do it? When would you offer it? Like everybody's staff meetings are at different times and it would be so hard to coordinate it to have the biggest reach.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really like things that, again, feel more bite-sized or more like as you need it.
Right. Yeah, I think about, so many of the schools that I have worked in have like grade level meetings,
Mhm.
but like there's no grade level meeting for a
No.
special education person, right? And so then I'm actually working in a school where sort of like by content they're getting together. And so then everyone kind of knows what everyone else is covering. It's in terms of like what math concepts they're covering. And then they can actually help each other with curriculum. They can help each other with how are you managing that in your classroom? I don't know. That seems like a shame to me. Even if it was like, this is the mandatory meeting. So when I was much more embedded in your district, there was a mandatory meeting one Friday a month for school social workers.
Yeah.
And everyone came together. And then they
Aw.
broke up into, by I think, grade level,
Mhm.
basically. So like, school social workers who were in high school versus middle school versus elementary school.
Mhm.
And then they had small groups so in the morning there was like everybody got some kind of information, training, whatever, resources. And then in the afternoon they broke out into these little groups and they did it every month.
Right.
And they were just off site. And that was a requirement from the district.
Right. And there are a couple of things, like there is a Google Classroom and there are like some sort of generic SPED offerings, but I'm talking about like actual person to person connection.
Mm-hmm.
Like somebody who's teaching, a sort of a similar population at your grade level that you could be like, what do you do when this comes up? Right.
Well, and even like, given where you teach, you're probably sharing students on and off with different people in the area, right? So like maybe just in your zone, whatever we call that, like you might be able to say, oh, I was working with Alfred last year or last month, right? And you might even be able to share like helpful hints in terms of what worked or didn't work.
And I think it speaks to how overworked, like of course everybody is overworked, but like in other states, for example, in my job, I would just be doing the instruction and somebody else would be case managing the IEPs. Mm-hmm. Somebody else is writing the IEPs. Somebody else is testing the students, things like that. But in our district, we do all of that. And so many times, a student has moved to another school and I've written to the new case manager and be like, let me know if you want to talk about this student, and never hear back because they're busy, right? They cannot, they don't have the capacity. And I understand that. I'm not mad at them. And I feel like there must be teachers out there who are like me and are like, I just want to ask somebody for advice. I just want to talk to somebody real who teaches
special ed. If there's anybody listening who wants to connect with Caitlin, just
please
drop
do
a comment or something.
Even if you're green, like I'm happy to help too. I'm a helper. I just want to talk to somebody.
Well, and often I think, green teachers come in with new ideas that they just heard about.
Yes, I love green teachers.
Or like there may be things that you heard about when you were in school, but now you have forgotten about because
and you're not jaded yet.
You're working as a teacher, and so they might be bringing back some idea that you're like, oh yeah, that was one of my 200. I want to get back to that.
Yes. Let's connect, y'all.
Feel free to leave a comment, and I will make sure to connect you all. There was a school I was working in a few years ago where they implemented the grade level meeting in a different way. So it was not this district, it was a different district, but they had these grade level meetings And the teachers had been complaining about not having time to talk to each other. And so the administration of that school, it was an elementary school, just said, okay, we're going to do it. And they just did grade level meetings, and they cut something else out to be able to afford that time for those 3 teachers in each grade level to sit and talk about students and what was going on and what they were seeing on the playground. You know, it was just like, and I was able to drop into those meetings because they already had them. And so then I was providing sort of, you know, whatever the trauma-informed lens on what they were talking about. And it was so helpful to hear, I think, that like, okay, there was a 3rd grade team. And I think it was really helpful to the teachers to hear that the other 3rd grade teachers were also really struggling with after lunch. And it turned out that the lunch monitor, whatever we call them, it wasn't a teacher, it was a person whose job it was to be in the lunchroom, was maybe inadvertently riling students up. There was a lot of yelling. There was a lot of silent lunch initiations, like no talking because it was too loud. There was a ton of stuff going on that we didn't really know about because I wasn't at that time doing observations of the lunchroom, which I always do now. And the administrator wasn't in the lunchroom because that was why they hired a person, so that the person could take care of it. And the person, it was really hard for the 3rd graders to come out of lunch and go back to class. And it was a huge benefit to the whole school, I think, for us to have learned that in a grade level meeting where basically just one teacher was vulnerable enough to say, I don't know what to do after lunch. It's just, my class is a wreck after lunch. And the other 2 teachers were like, oh my gosh, me too.
Right.
And I think just that moment, I could just see the relief on all of their faces. Just saying me too. Also, I am struggling with after lunch, even before we solved what was going on.
I think like our time to get together as teachers it's such a precious commodity, right? Like after school. And often it's not used expeditiously. Because that seems like that would be really helpful. And again, like it's not just about somebody hopefully having a solution or coming up with a solution. It's just being able to be heard, right? And it comes back to the co-regulation piece, right? I feel like we often kind of are each teaching in our own little bubble. We have our own kids and our own things that we're working on. But it's so helpful to just bounce things off whether or not we come up with an answer.
Right. Yeah. Just knowing that you're not alone.
Exactly.
Can go a long ways.
For sure.
So I think we're kind of winding down here, and I'm curious if you have takeaways, things you want to offer to other educators, and or things I guess we've already kind of talked about something you would like as an educator for yourself, but do you have any closing thoughts on offerings for other educators?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would like, I already said, I think that often general education teachers feel like they're bothering the special educators when they ask questions or ask for some time. But I see it as such a gift. Like I want to share these students with y'all. So the worst thing that can happen is that your special educator blows you off. And the best thing that can happen is that you can start a really terrific partnership. So for all the gen ed teachers and sped teachers out there, I think just reach out and try to connect with the folks who are willing and able to connect. And I'm not going to call it advice. I think just, again, it can be hard, but doing all that you can to find some sort of co-regulator. Maybe it's not at school. It's cool if it's at school, right? Because then they're there. But if not, somebody that you can be like, let me tell you the outrageous thing that happened at school today. Or like, here's something that I'm really wanting to work on. Just so you have like not only the ability to vent and be heard, but also like an accountability partner. Because sometimes, again, it can feel kind of lonely or like you're the only one with these struggles in the classroom or with these questions or with these concerns. So just really finding your people. And again, now we have, the internet for all of its terribleness and goodness. There are groups, and I'm sure there are like Discords and Reddits or whatever the other people go on. Instagram. There's so much good stuff on Instagram too. Just finding outlets, but also things that are interesting to you that remind you why you're teaching. And just staying connected, but also taking care of yourself and taking a break because it can get overwhelming.
Because the work is really, really hard. And if you think that it's just you that is somehow not getting it, that just makes it that much harder. Thanks so much for joining me today. And I hope that you'll be back on for another episode at some point.
I would love to. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Take care, y'all. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. If you're interested in learning more about our work or want to sign up for a consultation, check us out at hardcoreconsulting.com. Take care, y'all.